Before we get started with this episode of the Artists and Emotions podcast, and before we welcome Lexee Gordoun back to the show, I just want to first say that if you are not aware, the Artists and Emotions podcast is no longer exclusively on Spotify. We are also on Apple Podcast and iHeartRadio, and we have started diving our second season on to YouTube. So if you are interested in listening to the podcast on those platforms, please go there, like us, rate us, tell us your thoughts, tell us how we can improve, because honestly, we're all in this together, especially when it comes to our mental health journeys. So, thank you so much for listening. Now, on to the episode. Welcome to the Artists and Emotions podcast. I'm your host, Cody Alexander Curtis, and to say I'm excited for today's episode would be a bit of an understatement because we have our first official returning guest to the podcast, and that is my good friend, Lexee Gordoun, who is a filmmaker, a director, a writer, and a producer out of Australia. Lexee, how are you doing this morning?
Good. Thanks for having me back. I didn't realize that was first return. That's exciting.
Yeah, first return, and we have a lot. It has happened since the last time we talked. Which for any of you who may be wondering, the last time that Lexee and I like full on talked was your podcast episode. And once again, it comes down to the fact that with the lives that we live, we're busy basically 24/7. And so one of the big things that happened that I want to kick this off with, first of all, Lexee, how are you doing?
Good. It's funny because we say a lot's happened, but I don't feel like it has. I feel like a lot more has happened for you. I've really taken a bit of a break, which is, I guess, part of the emotions and feelings part of the podcast. But yeah, no, it's actually been nice to take a break, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, we're definitely gonna dive into that because that's not something I was expecting.
Yeah,
But
I know.
the first thing I want to talk about is we can get right into. First of all, I want to talk about how you feel taking a break now that you've officially had one. But first, I want to talk about Sasha's game
Yeah.
because the last time we talked, and for everybody listening, we were talking briefly about this before we started the podcast. But when we first talked, Sasha's game was right at the very end of post production, and you were getting it ready for whatever its festival run was going to be looking like. So from that point to now, how has everything with Sasha's game been going?
So yeah, I believe last time we spoke, we were rushing into post sound, including composing. We were doing side by side, very stressful. We literally handed in like a week late for the Jewish Film Festival, which was very stressful. But we got it done, and yeah, I'm really happy with where it's sitting. I would have loved another maybe 2 weeks on it, but life has it that way sometimes. That's what happens when you submit a rough cut. Um, but no, it was really good, and we had the premiere in November, so end of October. I think it was the 31st of October for Melbourne, which is Victoria State in Australia, and then it was the New South Wales premiere, which was in Sydney, which was November 9th. So yeah, back to back. Yeah, so I guess in that regard, like a lot did happen. It was quite daunting. I don't like public speaking, and it was the first time actually properly premiering a film with me in the room. So that was quite scary, but yeah, best experience ever,
Yeah.
100%.
How was the reception for the film?
Thank God, positive. You always yeah. My God, I was like, I don't want to be in the room watching people yawn and walk out. But no, yeah, no, it was really positive. Everyone was really lovely. We did Q&A after, some really good feedback, great questions. Yeah, yeah, very grateful. Like it was a really nice event, and I like did my best to make it worth everyone's money. So like, I had like an orchestra like on entrance, and like custom media wall, photographer, videographer, book sales at the front, and signings at the author. So yeah, it was a lot. Then speech at the start, and then Q&A at the end, and then complimentary drinks. So we did our best to make it worth everyone's time.
Yeah, I mean, you made a full-on event out of your film's premiere, and number one, I got to give you major props for that, because even in the indie film circuit, I don't know too many filmmakers who do that sort of thing. And the
Yes.
fact that I mean, the reception was great, the events were great. Uh, Knowing that you're terrified of public speaking makes me laugh, because I think
I
I
know,
used
you wouldn't think it, right?
yeah, it's like I used to be that way, but now I just like the attention too much.
But that's part of acting. I feel like you guys really hone in on the skill of being able to put up that facade and act in front of so many people at once and be vulnerable. So then just to do a speech is less vulnerable than to put your emotions on the line during a performance, I would think.
I mean, it's possible, although I have found out that if I am going to be speaking to a crowd of people, I prefer to turn it into a performance, and that means making people laugh within the first 5 minutes, because if
Yeah,
I can get people to laugh, usually my nerves will settle down, but if nobody's
same.
laughing, it just gets worse. But
100%.
so everything with the film has been going great. And so far, everything. First of all, congratulations! Like,
Thanks.
congratulations for all of that. And if you are able to share, what is sort of the plan with Sasha's game moving forward into the new year?
Yeah, so it's going through the festival circuit. The other day we actually found out got into Venice Shorts, which is great. Thank you. I was gonna fly, but I was like, because if I go to LA, then I can only go if it's because it's April 11th is when it's screening. Then I'd only
Yeah.
be able to go for like a week because it's just a busy period. So unfortunately, don't think I'll be attending it because I want to go to LA in June. But yeah, really happy. So the intention is for it to go through the festival circuit, hopefully get some attention from finances or some interest, write the feature film at the same time. And then, yeah, hopefully push it on. So we've got the low end budget and then the high end version of the same script and just see which one. Regardless, it has to get made. It's just about how.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's usually how it works.
Yeah.
But once again, congratulations for all of that. And as you said, you have been on a little bit of a break since everything sort of happened with Sasha's game.
Yeah. No, it's been good actually. Like I feel like as artists, I feel like we live a lot vicariously through our work. And I think sometimes we forget to actually live our life because we're so immersed and invested in it. So I think it's actually quite nice to actually live it and take, 2, 3 months off. So yeah, I think as we wrapped up, because I was production coordinator on a feature last November that wrapped. And as soon as that wrapped, I was like, no more projects. I'm like, I need at least a few months just to myself. As you know, you haven't had a break in years.
Yeah, and that train is still chugging along. That's all I
I
can
know.
say.
Like, you got more energy than I do, that's for sure.
Yeah, let me tell you though, I can definitely feel some major burnout is coming. Recently, I have not been able to wake up without feeling exhausted. Like, however, am I taking a break as of yet? No.
No,
There's
you
just
should. I think
the,
after your next project wraps up, I think you of all people need it.
yeah, the thing is, I can't take a break as of yet, and it's probably going to be a little bit before I can. However, I am
Yeah.
looking forward. I have a deadline of when I need to take a break. Otherwise, I'm gonna. I don't know what's gonna
You
happen.
don't wanna burn
But
out. Don't make a habit.
yeah, no. Although the last time we talked, it kind of felt like just being on a trajectory of constantly burning out is sort of the mindset that both you and I have all the
Not a
time.
good thing, though. Not a good thing. Just because we do it doesn't mean this should be the example to everyone watching. This is not a
Yeah,
good example.
no, it's not. And I'm sure you can attest to this. We are great at telling everybody when they need to pump on the brakes, but we never do. It's
That's why
just
I did. No, you have to. Like, it's like I get there's like an element of FOMO, like you don't want to miss out on an opportunity. But I think if you're doing that opportunity kind of, excuse my language, but half-assed because you're exhausted, it's just like, it's like, what is the point? You'd rather miss the opportunity, invest more in the quality stuff you're doing. That's my personal take, is I just couldn't think of, like, I don't know. I think every year I say to myself, like, this year I'm going to be a bit more selfish. And every year I take on everyone else's projects. And I'm like, this one's going to be a quieter year. I'll half the projects I did last year this year. And it always doubles. And then this year I said, nah, this year's actually just for me. This year is purely and, wholeheartedly just for my projects. And yeah, because I think the reality of our industry and just everything in life is things are transactional, whether or not we like to say it out loud or not, it's a fact. And the transaction could be you do a project for free and you get their network, or you do it because you want more experience in your portfolio so you can get a better job down the line. There is always a transaction. And I think as soon as that transaction is no longer worth what you're getting in return, it's time to stop taking that commitment, because what you're giving of yourself is your energy and your skill. So I think for you, it might still be worth it. But I think at that stage where you get to the point where you go, what am I gaining? And it's a selfish mindset, but we only have so much time and so much energy. You do have to go, at what point, like, is there like less to gain than what I'm giving? And it's fine to do favors for friends, 100%, and it doesn't have to be much of a gain, but you're still giving a lot, so it's got to be worth the amount of energy you're giving.
yeah, I completely agree. And I'm so glad that you brought up the whole burnout thing, because I feel this episode more than the last one uh,
Mm.
is a really good opportunity for you and I to both talk about that. Because I know last episode we talked a lot about business and about work, because that's where our mindset was, and ultimately that's still kind of where my mindset is right now. But in terms of burnout, uh, what was the sign for you that you needed to step on the brakes for a few months? Like, what was the big thing where you're like, yeah, if I don't, things are not going to go well in terms of my health or emotional health or.
Yeah, it's funny because I think last time we spoke, I said what it was immediately after Sasha's game film set, which was now 2022, which is insane. But where I burnt out so badly that I literally couldn't leave my bed for a few weeks, and I was super ill, and like I couldn't go into work. And I went in like the day after my set, and my boss looked at me and was like, "Go home." Like, I looked so bad. Yeah, and I just got really ill. So that was my first sign to kind of take a break, which I didn't, because I was like, oh, next year will be quieter. And 2023 was not quieter. Um, and then I think this year it was like, well, last year, when 2024, believe it or not, it's insane. But yeah, I think 2023, I just kept saying yes to projects, or not even committing. I would just say maybe, and they would take the maybe as a yes. And because I wasn't confrontational enough to let someone down, I would just do it because they misunderstood me. And it wasn't, there was no real burnout, I'd say. I think it was understanding that my life, in my personal life, was ramping up, and it actually had nothing to do with films. But films occupied too much space that I wasn't able to see friends. I wasn't able to enjoy my love life, my relationships. Like, I couldn't spend that much time with family. I wasn't like mentally present. And I was like, it was less about the burnout and more about being like, I'm 24. I want to be able to actually live my life and like experience what we're supposed to experience in our 20s, not just work. And don't get me wrong, I adore my work, but it got to a point where I was like, I'm really more like, I had this realization that I was so obsessed with my work, and it was because I was so uninspired in my own personal life. And it was a really hard realization to go, I'm living vicariously, because nothing about my own life right now is making me excited enough. And yeah, I think when I realized that, I was like, you know what, I actually need to change something in my own life. I can't keep vicariously living through stories I'm creating. It's not healthy. It's great for work, but it's, yeah, like, I should be inspired in my own life. I should be equally present in both.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because especially in the industry that we operate in, it is a very common thing to be told constantly. It doesn't matter how hard you work, you could always be working harder, and to the point to where you get really sick and leave everything else behind. It is such a common thing. And once again, it's one of the big reasons why I started the podcast, because this whole conversation, it's getting a mental health talk by celebrities every 3 to 4 years is not enough. And
Yep.
especially in the world of burnout, it's certainly not enough, because as we said before, walking into the entertainment industry is walking into the world of being an entrepreneur. And it is so easy to just completely destroy yourself because you don't feel like you're ahead.
Yep. It's completely correct. Yep. Yeah, it's intense. But how's your health? Because you haven't stopped.
Yeah. I haven't. And when I say I'm not, my health has actually been really good, other than the fact that I'm just really tired. But um I have a co-writer that I'm working on a feature film script with right now, and we
Gosh.
have a lot. We're in hopes. We've gone through a lot, because the initial draft of the feature film script I started 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, and it's
Mhm.
almost done. And I only recently brought on my co-writer, and we've just been going through it. And if we're on track, we're having a big writing day this coming Monday, which we're recording this on February 16th, February 17th for Lexee. And we're hoping to finish the script on the 19th, because we have a big, like, 10 to 12 hour writing day ahead of us. It's funny that you bring up the whole break thing, because I might be in Georgia now. My parents got a contract on a new house, so I'm going to be going up to Maine for the next year to help them
Oh,
just get everything sort of organized and moved out. However, I'm still going to be working throughout that entire time period. But I am the benefit here is that my sister owns horses, so I'm going to be spending a lot of time doing horse therapy, because
gosh,
it's
that's
just,
great.
yeah. So that's sort of my goal, because obviously it's not just the acting thing. I also have this podcast going, and sort of
It's true.
I'm gonna do what I can to get a break after the month of February is over, because I'm leaving to go back home around the 27th or 28th. But this next week, Monday is the day that I'm writing with my coworker. This Sunday, I have a dress rehearsal and wardrobe fitting for a film that I can't exactly talk about, but I can say that I'm the lead of. And then
Okay.
Tuesday through Friday, I have podcast guests that I'm going to be interviewing. And then that Saturday and Sunday is the production of the film. And then that the 27th or 28th, which is that Tuesday or Wednesday, that's when I leave to go back home. And it's a 16-hour
Gosh,
drive. So that's the next, like, week and a half of my life scheduled out.
it's a long drive.
Yeah. I want to do it in one shot. I drove the initial drive I did here in 2 days, but it's not my preference. I just want to get it over with, if I'm going to be perfectly honest.
How are you supposed to do 16 hours in one day?
My plan is every 2-ish hours, I'm going to stop at either a site or a gas station, stretch my legs, get something to eat or drink, and then keep going.
You're gonna not be able to. You should get like Monster or like Red Bull to sponsor you. I don't know how you're gonna. It's
but
crazy.
but yeah, I mean, other than that, it's like the biggest priority for me in terms of film related projects outside of acting is this feature film script. Obviously,
Yeah.
I'm submitting for projects because I still want to act, but while I'm back home, I am going to be stepping off of the gas just a little bit outside of the podcast, and outside of the script that me and my writing partner are doing, because
And yeah, as you should. Like I think you need to recoup. Like you're giving a lot of your energy in these acting roles and also writing roles. It's a lot of your heart, a lot of your energy. And to be giving that without filling your own cup is insane.
yeah, I don't think I even told you what when I went home after the Suitcases production wrapped, what
Yeah.
that whole year, because I said I was going to go home for, like, I went home for 2 weeks, and I said I'm going to rest.
Yeah, we all say
Yeah,
that.
we all do. But Suitcases wrapped. Spent the next week working on the thing in post production, and it's funny because my creative partner and our director of the film, Zach,
he looks at me after we wrap. He's like, "Here's the thing. I don't want you working on anything until you get back from vacation." The day before I leave, I'm like, "So, how would you feel if I had an extremely rough cut of the film already done?" And he goes, "I've never felt the need to kick you in the ass so hard in my entire life." But then I went home, never stopped working, and then came back, continued to work on stuff. January, I was on the set of a feature film. Then I got cast in this project I'm doing at the end of February. And then Suitcases is off with our sound mixer and the guy who's creating our score. And so that's also happening. But once again, I'm glad that you said that you have officially been on break, because I definitely feel it's sort of a blessing that the new IATSE contracts are hopefully going to be going into place and we don't go into another strike, and that they're
Yep.
still trying to integrate the new contracts, because with all of that stuff going on, things are extraordinarily slow. So it's going to be a good opportunity to just rest. Plus, my big goal after this feature script and everything is sort of wrapped with it is I'm gonna try and plan like a full 2 weeks to a month long trip to go to Europe to just
Beautiful.
chill out, because
Good on you.
I've been so, as you know, I have been so focused on work for the past 7 years now that I have not taken a break. And for the 3 years that you've known me, 4 years this year, because we met during COVID.
Yeah.
Like neither one of us have stopped. And I am once again back into therapy because of everything that's going on. But that is that. But what would you say for you, as you've had sort of your time off, what has been sort of the biggest blessing for you while you've had this time to just spend time with friends and family and just take some time for yourself and just rest?
Um, well, I mean, if we're kind of going into detail on personal life, like I was writing the feature, I was doing super well. I was grinding, and then my long-term ex and I broke up, which was more just like we went separate ways. It was time, like adore him, think the world of him. I just, yeah, I think we were young when we met, and we potentially didn't necessarily want the same things. And I think, sometimes time apart makes you realize or not realize or whatever. So, yeah, that kind of happened. And obviously, that's tough. So then I couldn't write anymore. And then because of what the film subject is about, then when the Israel Palestine war broke out, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism, I found it really difficult to write because it kind of felt a little bit too real, like just lots of murder, and I couldn't, like I just didn't have the stomach for it. So that took at least 2 months to be like, okay, I've got the stomach to write it. And then kind of like, ramped up my love life a little bit and was like, okay, I need to get back dating. And yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing, because I think we draw a lot of inspiration from our personal life, and I think it's important to have experiences. So yeah, I think I haven't had the mental capacity to write because I think it's occupied, and I don't think having it occupied is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's good to take space from creativity or to delve into other creative hobbies. Like now I'm just playing piano a lot more. Like I took like a year break from that, and now I'm back playing. I haven't painted in ages. Now I'm painting again. So I'm like, it's just different creative outlets. And I think to some degree, it's nice to dip into them and just kind of, I don't know, just take a break from the film kind of world, because it's extremely intense and it isn't just a creative field. It also requires a lot of business mind and intellect and energy. So it's quite nice to take a bit of a step back and just be able to, like, I don't know, just recoup. And then when I view it again, hopefully fresh eyes, different perspective, or maybe it'll validate that what I love what I wrote. But I think at the time that I took a slight step back when everything kind of started shifting in my own personal world, um, I was sort of not writer's block, but I was sort of at a crossroad where I'm like, I'm kind of unsure how it's going to get to where it needs to get. And there was like scenes I was skipping over, and I'll be like, I'll return to them. And I hadn't. So I think, yeah, I think a break is good. But I also think there's a weird line between like proactively looking for inspiration versus passively just allowing it to come for you. And I think if you force inspiration, you could destroy a good thing. But if you don't try to force it at all, you can become complacent. So I think that's a tough balance.
That is, first of all, beautifully put. Secondly, I think it is an excellent point. And I'd be curious from sort of the writer and director perspective what your thoughts are about what I'm going to say. Because in the acting world, there's sort of once again, the whole hustle and bustle of the industry. There's sort of this push to just constantly be immersing yourself with acting classes and acting workshops and like acting auditions and everything under the sun. But
Yep.
the one thing for me I've taken from this past year, and it all stemmed from one book I read, is, and hearing this quote from Alan Rickman, which is to be a really great artist or a great actor, consuming yourself with the world of acting is not a healthy way of living. And for me, it's like I think about all of the roles that actors want to play. Like if we think about 90 to 95% of the time, yeah, maybe 5% of the time the characters you're being cast as are actually actors. But 90 to 95% of the time they're not. They're like the engineer or the mother down the street. And those people aren't focusing on studying and being good actors in the world of acting because they want to tell stories about actors. And so my whole perspective has sort of shifted, and it might ruffle some feathers, but I am not someone who is overly obsessed with acting classes. Like I'll do them, yes, to like keep myself sharp, but I'd much prefer to just read good books and go out and experience life, especially more so this next coming year. And the book that I didn't say the title of, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the author's name. As I have always said, I should probably get on that, but it's very foreign and it's I will butcher it. But it's essentially about how the trauma or the things that we experience when we're little, they aren't just skin deep, they go right down to the cellular level. And if they're not looked at or addressed in any kind of capacity, they more or less shape the kind of person that you become and your view of the world and everything else. And for me, it's something that I read initially because I was gearing up for Suitcases, but after reading it hit me that most acting instruction and acting teachers in the world of acting doesn't talk about looking at what these characters that you're studying, what they've been through, and specifically what happened to them when they were a child, a kid, or a teenager. And those are ultimately the things that, or who they were raised by. Like I'll say right here and now, my personality and my sort of hustle and bustle attitude comes directly from my mother. Because when she was, I love her to pieces, but when she was my age, she was going to college full time. She was a full time mother. She had a full time job, and she was basically house sitting like her brother's kids. Like that was what her world consisted of. Oh, and she was also married, and she had to take care of her marriage during that time period. But once again, these are things that we don't necessarily talk about in the acting world because they're not pretty and they're not flashy. But a lot of the things, at least in my opinion, in the acting world are so I like the term old fashioned, but in this case, I think it is not necessarily a good thing because I think focusing on too much technique and not focusing on the experiences that you have or the stories that come from other people is what holds a lot of storytellers back. Now, I've talked about the acting side of things. I would like to hear your thoughts on that, but sort of from the writer, producer, directing side of things.
Like in terms of like not doing too much research, not like going out, it's more about understanding the normality of like what you're writing about. Is that like
I think that's part of it. But I guess a better way to phrase it is not overly consuming yourself with so much work that you don't know how real life and real stories and other things operate, because you're so much in the world of like grind set to get work done. Like, is that something that you have seen inside of the world of filmmakers from your perspective, of course?
Um, yeah, I think so. I think people often are like, what's next? And I think that's like a mentality that there's a lot of pressure on us artists to be like, what's next? What's next? And they always say you don't go to a networking event without knowing what your next project is. And I think it does create a slightly unhealthy mentality where you're constantly on the go and you can't actually focus presently on what you're working on. So, like, I don't think there's any project I've ever worked on where I haven't started writing the next project while I was working on it. And that is not healthy because you can't give 100% of your heart, your mind, your soul, your intellect, your energy into one project. And you can't, let alone split it in. Like, it's really difficult to find that kind of energy. And as you know, it's mentally taxing and your mind is running 24/7. And it's not, which I think is a big reason why I took the break. It was less about the actual work and more about the in-between moments, because if the actual work was just me sitting at my laptop for an hour a day, it's a totally different story. But it's not, because as soon as you start, you don't stop. And it's not that you're sitting there for 1 hour and then you just keep writing. It is, you're out for drinks and your mind sees something and then you just want to write it down, and then you're sitting at a table and everyone's talking over you and you're silent because you're thinking, and it consumes you. So I think choosing when you begin to write again and when you begin to work on something is completely consuming, and it doesn't just take up one part of your life. And as we've discussed before, film isn't a job, it's a lifestyle. And I think it is all consuming and extremely taxing on your energy, and a totally beautiful thing. And like, that's the problem, is we're obsessed artists. And I think it's really tough to take a step back. So yeah, I think that is like a massive reason why I took the break. Was I just seriously needed the in-between moments of my life to feel like I could be present, and it was less about the actual moments of writing itself. So yeah, I think to some degree it's different to acting, where you guys are studying acting and you're studying techniques. Well, I guess it's not, because a lot of us like listen to podcasts on writing and film directing and stuff. But I think at some stage it's almost like we have too many resources at our fingertips and we're all going to become clones if we all just, I mean, it's obviously important to learn what worked and then to be able to break that. I think that's obviously really important. But I also do not think that is the only way to write. And I think sometimes learning techniques too much suppresses creativity and uniqueness. And that is where I imagine for acting, it would be more about living your life and observing, and a lot less about going to 100 acting schools and meeting 100 new people. It's more about observing just the normality of life and the quirks of different experiences. And that is really what you pull from when you're acting. And I think it's slightly different when you're writing, because we can edit things and you guys can't. You guys are in the room at the time trying to pull from emotions and experiences that you understand then and there, whereas we are writing and we can pull from other people's experiences and educate ourselves without having to have learnt experience. So yeah, I think from the perspective of not over educating yourself, I think there's definitely something to be said about like raw talent that is just driven by passion and a very simple understanding of what a film is. And I think by overcomplicating it, you find like a lot of technically boring films.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I also, at least from my experience, the actors who I have found to impress me the most outside of just raw talent, same thing with directors, are the ones who, outside of their art, have actually lived a life. Like, whether they have like started out as actors and directors, took a break and then came back to it, or it's very new to them. Like, a lot of the actors that I talk to who I admire, who I consider my closest friends, are not people like me who have been doing it their entire lives. They're people who are in their 40s and 50s who either, I know one actor who started out acting when he was young, took a 20-year break and has come back to it. And then there's two other actors who started it in their 40s and 50s. And they are some of the most talented people I've ever met. And it's
Yeah.
I mean, they've put in the work to learn about this because as soon as they got started, they started doing acting classes. But for me, it's like it's not just about the acting classes. It's about the amount of life and stories and experience that you've lived before you got into this. And same thing with directing. One for the Road, the director David Jester and his head producer Lee, he was one of the head honchos at a local fire department that's close to the town I grew up in. But he was doing film on the side, but film was like sort of a minor thing. And then she's always been a wedding photographer for like the past 10, 15 years. And they just recently fully dived into the world of like producing and directing. And I felt honored to work with them because, to be honest, David's one of the best directors I've ever seen because he understands life. It's crazy. But also, I think that we as creatives, we just don't give ourselves that permission to step away from things, because I do put this as an industry thing where it's been pushed to us. If we step away, we're going to completely fall off the track and the industry is not going to welcome us back in.
Yep.
Even when we're only in our 20s. And that's one thing I was talking about with Sam Ford. He's a wonderful actor out of the UK. And one of the things we talked about is the fact that we put ourselves into these camps because we're all in our 20s. And yet if we compare the amount of things we've accomplished and done and we're working towards to like the 99% of the masses, like we are anomalies. Like there's no other way to put it. But we also the people that we look at is not the masses most of the time. It's the people we're standing next to, the people who are in our own age group, the people like I said, I hang out with people who are older, but I also have a great admiration for people like you and like Sam and like my buddy Zach, like so many other people. And we all collectively don't ever feel like we've done enough.
I think it's, it does definitely depend who you surround yourself with. Like I found, and it was a really unhealthy pattern at the start of last year, where I was comparing myself to people that were in their 30s and their 40s with where I'm at. And I was constantly feel like I'm not doing enough. And my ex at the time was like, these people have like 15, 20 years over you. Like, why are you trying to run their race? And I was like, I have no fucking idea. I was like, because if I compare myself to people my age, I think I'm doing pretty fucking well. But I'm like, I don't want to just be doing well. I want to be 20 years ahead of where I should be. And that is why I'm comparing myself unrealistically. It's because it gives you like a bone to chase. And I think it is healthy motivation and sometimes also extremely disheartening because you forget that there's reasons why you cannot actually be at that stage. And some of it is just time and just experience and exposure. And what you were saying about, like life experience and live life experience, I guess it comes down to the question of, does art mimic life or life mimic art? And I think it depends, like which direction you kind of take your films.
Yeah, for sure. We have time, and it's so interesting. Like being when you're an entrepreneur in one sense, and you're in your 20s in another sense, and then you've got, because I don't think that comparatively looking up to people who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, it's not a bad thing because those people have accomplished a really, really great thing and they're great examples to look up to. The problem is when you think you should be where they're at. One of my favorite stories is, and it went around recently, is Denis Villeneuve. It's like his filmmaking journey. He didn't like officially get recognized until he was in his 40s. And he's one of the best filmmakers working today. It's
tough because like everyone runs their own race at their own time. But I think for people like us, we don't have patience. And like something I spoke about on the last podcast is, and look, I don't think this is necessarily a normal mentality, but like for me, like I do want a family and I do want a house and I do want the kids and I also want my career. But I think our career is so financially unstable that if for me, I haven't already kind of planted my feet pretty securely by the time I'm 30, I wouldn't feel secure staying in this field and raising kids and having to all these like mortgages and whatever. So I
Yeah.
think for women, we also have the added sense of body clock. And after watching my sister have her first child, and just the year is pretty much a write-off. The first year of the child's life is a complete write-off for you. It's so tough to manage that if you have more than one kid, that's 2-3 years a write-off. It's tough. So I'm like, you do naturally lose momentum. So it's important to kind of build that momentum beforehand. That is my personal take. And that is why
Yeah.
I personally am like tracking myself with people that are significantly more successful and have more life experience. But yeah, I think some people are just completely driven by ambition, and it's just ambition, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with um, goals outside of film. And that's an incredible thing. But for me, it's driven by both. It's driven by like a need for some sense of security in the least secure industry.
You hit on some very, very important points there. And first of all, Lexi, where you're at right now, you are going to be just fine. I mean, if we're talking about one of the hardest working, driven, motivated, how many more adjectives can I come up with? You're gonna do absolutely fine. And I for me it's like I completely agree with you on that aspect. Everybody has to sort of run their own race when it comes to this, and pursuing this with ambition for stuff, like, more power to those people. But it's something that we mentioned on the last episode, is the reason for us being in this industry is not just like ambition for the sake of ambition. It's ambition because we're trying to leave a legacy. Like, we want something not just for our families, but we want something where people can look to who we are and what we've done and actually be inspired to know that they can do the same things. Because ultimately, as much success as you and I have both had, we also started at the bottom with literally nothing. And that's also one of the big reasons why rest is so important, because if we're going to keep going in this industry.
Yeah, exactly. I know we're so early in our careers, we're already burnt out. No, it's good fun. You have to laugh about it. Like, it's comical how this industry runs and how everyone burns out, and so much of our job is just to play make believe, and we're so underappreciated, so undervalued. And then everyone just gets to watch something you pour your heart into over 3 years and just make a quick judgment that they don't like it. And it's quite literally as simple as that for them. And I think it's just such an odd industry that you put on this expensive dress. And when you really think about it, it's all kind of meaningless and also so meaningful at the same time. And it is such a paradox that you put on a $10,000 dress that some designer made, which is art in their own field, and you wear it to a red carpet event that people take photos at, but the actual event behind the scenes is completely cringe. And you're only doing it because of what it looks like to build celebrity status, to then get people to watch a piece of content that you poured your heart out into, just for some people to think it's meaningless, is just the most bizarre industry in the world, I think. But we do it because we think that the art that we're creating is meaningful, even though the stuff around it is meaningless. And I think that is the paradox of the industry, is that we only do it because we think, whether it is us putting a mirror up at reality and saying, look at what we're experiencing, or if it's creating an escape, whatever it is, we think our art is meaningful, and that is why we do it. But I just think it is such an interesting industry, and it requires so much energy for how little it is appreciated. And I think the funniest thing for me is people never say, like, I don't know about it, what it's like for you, but if someone says, what do you do? And I go, film. Only recently people go, wow, that's so interesting. Like, no one says they do something like that. Tell me about it. But it used to be, I don't know what's changed, but it used to be, oh, cool. And I'd be like, that's funny, because I'm like, it actually requires everything. It requires like intellect, business mentality, artistry, creativity, uniqueness,
Endurance.
energy, endurance, yeah, networking, like being able to like run a ship with, like, however many people. Like, it requires so many skills. And then the funniest part about that to me is when people raise an eyebrow and you tell them what you do. Is the only thing at every get together I've ever experienced, or any dinner, is people say, "What are you guys watching?" And what they bond over is a commonality of media they're consuming that we're creating, but then they roll their eyes when you tell them what you do. And I just think it's so ironic. Like,
I mean, I completely agree, and it is sort of the same over here. I
mm,
will say, I think the big difference is well, it's probably not like a difference. The people who are in creative fields, when you tell them that that's what you do, automatically like, oh, okay, very cool. What are you working on? Let's talk about some stuff. In most of the
yeah,
work settings that are not, because for the past little bit, I've been working at Starbucks, and every single person who works at Starbucks, I swear, is either an animator, they are an actor, they are a filmmaker. They're like in some creative field, and that's sort of how we've bonded. But when I was working at a hardware store, right before I left, I'll never forget this because just how cruel it was. I left because of how miserable I was. Turned to one of my coworkers. I'm like, yeah, the thing is, I'm giving myself some more free time. I want to make myself happier because I'm an actor and filmmaker first and foremost. That's what I'm going to do. They looked right at me and said, well, I hope you're ready because you're going to be back here. You'll see.
that's awful.
Yeah, it is. And so it's kind of that thing. And I noticed I was at my buddy's wedding the other day, and same kind of thing. Whenever they would ask, they're like, okay, so what do you do? I'm an actor and a filmmaker. It's that sort of mentality. And now, okay, so what have you been on that I've seen?
Yeah. Yeah. It's always, do I know anything you've done? And my answer is always like, you will. Not now, but you will. It's just like, yeah, it's like they value, but it's funny because if you ask them what they do and they're like, I'm a consultant, and you go, what firm do you work for? And you don't know it, you go, that's great. Like, tell me more about your job. But we don't
Yeah.
say, oh, I've never heard of da 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 da. So it must be a shit company. I've never heard of your name. It's like, no, it's like, it's a job. It's like, yeah,
It's
it's
like,
strange.
and still in this world today, for whatever reason, even though the arts is sort of the cool thing now, there's still pockets in our little complicated world where it's being an artist is not like a job. But if you analyze being a director or an actor or a producer, specifically a producer, the things
Yeah,
that
that's
producers
their
have to
job.
get done, like, if there is one person who puts literally all their cards on the table to make sure art gets made, it is all of our producing teams.
Yeah.
Uh, but then, of course, we're talking about people who don't, they like watching entertainment or reading it and discussing it, but they don't look at the inner mechanics of how everything operates.
And they shouldn't have to. It's not their
Mm,
responsibility, the same way we don't look into the inner mechanics of how a company is run.
yeah.
But it's the fact that they so highly value and consume media but don't respect the people that create it. That is what irks me.
Yeah. And I mean, if we just look at COVID this past year, what was the number one thing that brought people together? Stories.
100%. Yeah, and still does. Like every, like it's always a conversation. It is. I've never ever been at a dinner where something about media has not become a conversation. It is always a conversation to break the ice. So, and I think a lot of people don't realize how much they learn through media, because part of what we do is we allow people to experience things they would never be able to experience through a form of escapism to better understand their own like sense of self. And they don't understand how much they've discovered about themselves because of media, because we can't just throw them in jail and say, let's see how you handle it, but we can make them watch someone else's experience in jail and they can decide morally where they sit. And I think
Hmm.
there's a lot to it that people don't understand, just how complex and how much value it really does provide outside of just entertainment. It's educational, it's self-reflective, it's introspective, it's like, it's, yeah, it's quite a bizarre little little industry that is, yeah, got a lot of money and also very little at the same time.
And this is one of the big reasons why mental health is just, this is one of the things that I find we all sort of briefly touch on, but as it compounds, it really is a negative thing. Is all of those conversations we've been talking about, whether they are with friends or with family, where the question is constantly, what are you working on? What are you doing what I've seen? What are you directing that I've seen? Have you had something go to Sundance or to Slam Dance or to TIFF or to Toronto? It all compounds after year after year after year. And it's a certain point. If there is any creative out there who has said that they have not thought about giving up on this industry at least once, I'm sorry, you're a liar.
Well, they
Like,
haven't been in it long enough.
yeah, exactly. That's the other thing because Amelia Clark said that let's hear what is the quote? If you're going into this industry, are you sure that you want to be doing it? Because you do have to be sort of psycho to be in this industry, right? And the only reason why you stick through it, through all the ups and downs, through all the burnout, through stepping away from it once in a while is because you ultimately don't have a choice emotionally, because it's the one thing, as difficult as it is, it's the one thing that brings you joy and the one thing where you feel you can have an impact.
Yeah, totally. It's yeah, and something you were saying as well that was really interesting is that which I personally disagree with, but you said that you think it's very similar the way that media is perceived here and there. When I was in the US, I was shocked by how well respected the industry is. Of course, that's I hadn't spoken to people that said, "What do you do for work?" It wasn't like that, so I don't know conversationally how it's perceived. But like in Australia, all I'm used to is occasional banners, stuff on the back of buses, and it's small and usually has a bit of graffiti on it, and no one really cares. And like people say, "Have you seen it?" "Oh, can't be bothered." And I went to LA, massive banners, massive respect, nothing's graffiti, the posters are immaculate. And I was like, oh my God, they like respect it here. Like they don't really respect it in Australia. Like enough to graffiti on a sign that costs like a few $1,000s to put up. But that's also like I haven't experienced having a conversation with someone there. And I think maybe because it's oversaturated, maybe
Yeah,
it is conversationally very like undermined with like, oh yeah, aren't we all actors? Aren't we all filmmakers? You know?
yeah, that's very interesting that you bring up because I see your point there, and I will agree that the big metropolitan cities like Atlanta, New York, Los Angeles, yeah, Boston, yeah, it's all very, very highly respected because
Yeah.
that's where the industry is the most prevalent. But I will
Right.
say, in terms of the state that I grew up in, it does feel like there's a bit of disrespect towards artists because number one, Maine, Stephen King state. It is where he was born. It's where most of his stories take place.
Really?
There is, yeah, 90%
Okay.
of Stephen King stories, they take place in some facet of Maine or New Hampshire.
Wow.
And do you know how many films have been made in the state of Maine that are actually based off of his stories?
Probably a lot, no?
I'd say probably maybe one or two that are well known.
What?
Because the rest of them, yeah, the rest of them are either shot in Canada or in the South or in a place that can be replicated to look like the state of Maine. I mean,
Is
I,
Maine expensive? Why are people not filming there?
I'm not 100% sure. It is an expensive state. It's a retirement state. But the fact of the matter is, we have Massachusetts and Boston next door. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not any more expensive than Los Angeles or New York or Boston would be. But for whatever reason, the government in the state of Maine has not passed any kind of tax credit for Maine filmmakers to bring in jobs to create stories. And so most of the time, the advertising teams that are in Maine that want to film in Maine, they have to go down to Boston and get sponsors and advertising and financing there before they can even come up to film in Maine because they just don't have it. It's it's nuts. Things are getting better, but it's not perfect.
That's tough. I feel like, yeah, like maybe it is the tax stuff because I was going to say if most of the artists that would be working on the project are like Los Angeles based or based in like, the West, like it does make more sense to stay there from a financial perspective. Like it'd be cheaper to build the set than it would be to fly everyone over and accommodate them. So I kind of understand that, but I guess yeah, there obviously is something that like the state could be doing to encourage, like benefits or tax write-offs or incentives or whatever it is. So
Lexi, I want to say thank you so much for your time.
no,
Like
pleasure.
there's been, I mean, once again, it's been like 5 months since the last time we officially talked, and I am hearing that you gave yourself a break. It does nothing but bring me joy because you absolutely deserve it.
Yeah.
So before we sort of go on that note, is there any sort of last things you want to say, or sort of pieces of advice to anybody who may be listening who has the same mindset that you and I have, where they don't, at a certain point, they don't think that they deserve or can give themselves a break, because if they do, everything's going to sort of fall apart or spiral?
Um, I think like there's no shame in taking a break, and there's no shame in acknowledging that your mental health can be more important than your art at times, and your art can take a back seat, and it can afford that. Like there is no rush. I know it's strike while the iron's hot, and I completely get that, but I think there's no point striking if you're half burnt out. And as artists, we are essentially selling ourselves as part of the product. And if you are not at your 100% best, you're not going to sell the product. So I think, yeah, it's being able to prioritize yourself, enjoy your life, draw experiences and inspiration from it. And yeah, just kind of, I like, there's no shame in it. And I think we really do, unfortunately, value burnout in our society. And we value that as a kind of, you're working hard, good for you, you're burning out. Like, like grinding is like really viewed quite positively. And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. So yeah, I think it's just acknowledging when it's time to take a break and not being embarrassed by that. And the people that are your friends will be your friends, and the industry can wait. Like it's really not worth like resenting the industry for long term because you didn't take that 2-3 month break.
Yeah, solid. Very, very solid. So, first of all, once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your advice. That's really solid advice, and advice I should probably take sometime here
You
soon.
definitely should. You need it.
Lexi, where can everybody follow you so they can stay up to date with everything you got going on in terms of Sasha's game or whatever else down the road?
Yeah, Instagram's my best little hub. And if they ever delete it, we as artists are all fucked. We're really riding on Mark's not to delete this. But yeah, so Instagram is the best handle. So that's at Lexee Gordoun, LEXEEGORDOUN. Yeah, that's probably my most updated little mini portfolio. And from there, there's all my other links.
This has been the Artists and Emotions podcast. My name is Cody Alexander Curtis. I want to thank Lexi for coming onto the show today and talking about her experience over the past few months. And I hope everybody who is listening is able to take something from this podcast on your mental health or creative journey. So until next time, my name is Cody Alexander Curtis. This is the Artists and Emotions podcast, and I'll see you next time.